This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everyone. I've got a topic I want to talk about today. We're going to talk about the idea of photography as narrative, and I want to get into this. I've got some awesome examples of some different projects that I want to show you. Real quick, though, I have to share this with you because this is so awesome. So this came in the mail yesterday. I got this package. It was addressed to me from a gentleman named Les Wallum. Les is a very dear family friend. He was an amazing commercial photographer. He's retired since then. He doesn't live in Dallas anymore. He's moved down just outside of Austin. Anyway, this is really a nice surprise. He sent me this image that he took of Arnold Newman about 2 years before Arnold died. If you're not familiar with Arnold Newman, I did a video on him years ago. Arnold is most known for his environmental portraits. He photographed a lot of very famous figures in the 60s and 70s. Les had an amazing opportunity to actually be his assistant for about 2 years and was on some of these major photo shoots. And I want to share this with you because this was really nice. It was out of the blue. I haven't talked to Les in a long time, and I'll just share a little of his note here with you. He says in here, talking recently with friends about the legendary photographer Arnold Newman, who I assisted for 2 years in the early 70s. I was reminded the last time I saw him. In 2004, I was visiting New York City and stopped by Arnold's studio on West 67th Street to see him. We sat and talked about our time together over 30 years ago, and then he asked how I was doing and how my career was going. He passed 2 years later, and I went to his funeral and saw many of the other legends of photography there. I have often thought about that day and our few hours together talking about the things that we had experienced. I had seen him often over the years, but this last time was very special. Arnold Newman was a true giant in the world of photography, and I was so fortunate to work with him so early in my career. Anyway, very cool that Les sent me this print. He actually inscribed it on here and thought that I should have it. So, along with a couple other things that are waiting to be framed, I'm going to actually get these framed and up on the walls very soon. I'm very excited. So, Les, thanks for the picture. All right, so on to our topic for today, which is this idea of photography as narrative. Now, typically when we think of the idea of photography, we think of it in the context of a single image. And a single image is a very powerful thing. It's something that I've spent 15 years on this channel talking about. And it's something that is very powerful, very amazing, and it involves this idea of using a visual language to express ideas through geometry, through abstraction, maybe it's through familiar objects, and that is our mode of communication. Now, however, a photograph, in essence, on its own, lives in just a fraction of a second. It is a moment frozen in time. In other words, we don't have the component of time that we do have with something like a movie, film, video, theater, even dance or music. Those arts have the element of time, and they're able to develop a formal structure over a period of time. Now, the way we get around this with photography, where we can start looking at formal structure, is to do this over a series of images. So we've talked about things like photo sequences in the past. You could put together a small portfolio of images. You could put together an exhibition of images that are grouped together, that you're communicating now over a series of images. And I think the most powerful tool in all of this would be the idea of the book. Now, for me, the book is what opens up the concept of the narrative. So in other words, what is a narrative? Well, if we think of expressing an idea that becomes more complex than something you can say in a single image, maybe it's a concept that you want to explore, maybe it's even a story that you want to tell. And being able to do that in a formal structure over a group of images becomes a very, very powerful thing. Now, I have looked at a lot of books over the years that I've done this show. In fact, in more recent years, I've done showing a lot of viewer work, and it's been something that I've enjoyed quite a bit. And most books that you see, whether they're amateur or even professional, tend to be kind of greatest hits kind of compilations. In other words, they're a compilation of images that don't necessarily relate to one another. They might over a spread, and they might over maybe a small section of the book, but in general, it's a collection of single images. It's not really exploring a narrative. So it's actually kind of rare that you see people using the book as a tool to explore narrative. So what we're going to do in this video, and I'm going to use examples from 3 different photographers. These are all viewer examples. So this is sort of a male video, but I want to take it out of the context of what we usually do. All 3 of these photographers are incredible, and they've explored narrative in their books in 3 very unique and different ways. And what I want to do is point out some of the compositional tools and elements and devices that they're using to kind of provide that narrative and that cohesivity across the book. And I think that these are 3 great examples of this. So we're going to start with this little book, which is absolutely fabulous. I don't speak Turkish, so I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce this, but the English translation is called Alone in the City. This comes to us from Aaron Coral. Aaron included this nice little note, which reads, "Dear Ted, I've been following your channel for years and very much appreciate your added value to the photography community. My name is Erhan Karal, and I am a street photographer from Istanbul. I've always admired people who have taken the next step to publish their work, and in May of 2022, I opened up my first solo exhibition exhibition titled Alone in the City. And with this exhibition came the idea of publishing my first booklet. It's not a regular photo book, but it's a start. Now I'm preparing material to publish a more detailed and proper photo book, which will include my past 10 years or so of work. I hope you enjoy this small booklet as much as I enjoyed while shooting these pictures. All the best, Aaron. So what I want to point out that's very impressive is in Aaron's project, the idea of putting this together as a group of images. So he's already starting to think in this narrative context. So this started as an exhibition. It kind of manifested itself in this smaller booklet, which is going to lead to a larger book project. And I think that that's been in mind the whole time. It's not just collecting images to put in, it's actually coming up with a narrative. The street photography in here is very well executed. I love the contrast to the black and whites. I think this is very well laid out. He didn't do full bleeds on anything, and I think this is great because it allows the images to breathe. What's also interesting is how some of these images do have contextual relationships to each other. There's usually a common element across spreads, which makes the images make sense in this order. So for instance, this one that is basically architecture with water in the backdrop is very interesting to me. But what's most interesting to me about this book is the sense of continuity that we get, and you probably already noticed this. Each one of these photographs includes the human figure. Not only does it include the human figure, but most of them are done at a pretty radical scale. In other words, the human figure is pretty small in the image in juxtaposition with the environment that is presented in. And so this is really strong effect, and it's actually very difficult to do because if the image gets too busy, it's really hard to bring emphasis to that human figure. And I think this is really well done. I just love this as an example because I get a lot of street photography books, and typically it's just the way street photography is. It's a really difficult style of photography to spin into some kind of narrative. And I think the idea of using conceptual ideas in terms of composition really is what drives this forward. And it's the whole idea of having the human figure in each image, the juxtaposition, and then you have these elements that relate to each other across spreads. And this is very well done. It's hard to tell a story, in other words, like that has a beginning, middle, and end using street photography unless you're really uncovering an event. You do see that a little more often in photojournalism, which is a little bit different than street photography. But anyway, this is very well executed. So, Aaron, thank you for sending this. This is an awesome book. You should be very proud. All right, so now we're going to contrast the idea of narrative in street photography, and we're going to take it in a different direction. And this is a book that comes to us from Svetoslav Ivanov. This is the second book that Svetoslav has sent to me, and this one is excellent. It's a book called Impact, which is a book on kickboxing. Svetoslav writes, "The photos in this book are a selection of shots that I took of athletes who took part in kickboxing competitions held in northwestern Bulgaria. The events are two major international competitions. These athletes, some of whom are still children, face great physical and emotional challenges. The portrait photos were taken during the training of the athletes, minutes before the sporting event in locker rooms. I met the participants and asked them if they wanted to be photographed. My idea was to create a book that reflects the whole sporting event of kickboxing and what the athletes go through in the ring. As in any competition, there are winners and losers, and I think this is a challenge for the strongest characters. Each of the contestants had a specific cause and was fighting for something. Each of these competitors experienced the event in their own way and somehow become stronger. The photos reflect the dedication and the passion of the athletes which they perceive entering the ring." So clearly the narrative here is exploring kickboxing on a deeper level. So we're actually taking this on a personal level with the athletes, and we're exploring a lot of the action that happens. I love that Svetoslav actually shoots this book in three very distinct styles. So we have the studio portraits, then we have the action shots, and then we have some studio action shots. I think one of the things that obviously makes this book incredible is just the name of it. Impact is a great title for this, and I love the cover, which just kind of has this ball on the front. I also really love the aesthetic in here. The whole thing is in black and white. It's a little bit gritty. Some of the photos are even blurry. It just has a really raw feel to it. And so I think that the aesthetic really, again, reinforces the narrative that we're talking about with exploring this idea of kickboxing. So Mr. Ivanov, thank you for sharing. This book is excellent. All right, so this third book that I want to share with you is particularly interesting in that this was a project that took about 30 years of photographing to put together. And so it's on a very, very interesting subject. This is probably one of the more interesting subjects I've ever seen in a book that's been sent in. So I'm going to share this with you, but real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace. Listen, you need a website, and we all know how much work that is to build and maintain, but it doesn't have to be. Squarespace is by far the easiest way to build your online presence. It's also the best way to grow a business that works for you without having to write a single line of code. Do you just need a simple portfolio or a blog to showcase your work? Well, Squarespace is perfect. featuring a drag-and-drop interface. It's intuitive, it allows you to build galleries quickly and update your site with ease. Are you running a business? Well, Squarespace gives you additional tools for things like appointment scheduling, private member areas, social media tools, and even advanced email marketing. Do you sell products or services? Well, Squarespace has you covered with complete tools to power your store, from merchandising to checkout, so that you can sell, ship, and build your customer base. You can even sell classes or manage appointments through your website. And with Squarespace extensions, you can easily sync with third parties to manage, optimize, and enhance your website. From social media integration to SEO, Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to grow a business that works for you. So head over to Squarespace and sign up for the free trial. Start with one of their award-winning templates and see what you can create and just how good you're going to look. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AOP and I can save you an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Just use offer code AOP on checkout. So give it a try and see if Squarespace is right for you. And I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, so next up is a project that is particularly impressive. This comes to us from Jim Graham. This is called Bound to the Country, 30 Years Photographing Mr. Stewart's Cheshire Foxhounds. This is a really long-term project that deals with equestrian lifestyle and the breeding of these Cheshire Foxhounds in an area that's somewhere between Delaware and Pennsylvania. I'm going to read a little bit of this to you in the description because it's pretty complex, but Jim also sent a note here, which is kind of interesting. It says, Ted, I enjoyed your piece on Ralph Gibson's new book and got to thinking that I should pass on one of mine. It was also printed at Exton at Brilliant. It was a great process, and I can't recommend Bob's team enough. I hope you will enjoy the book, Jim. So if you haven't seen it, Ralph Gibson did his most recent book. So if you haven't seen the video that I did on that, Ralph Gibson did his most recent book at Brilliant, which is in Exton, Pennsylvania, which is exactly where this was printed. And I have a little bit of an interview in there with Bob Tersak. It's really cool. Go check it out. But on to Jim's book. Early in the 20th century, the land beyond Wilmington, Delaware, could be easily mistaken for the English countryside. In 14 miles along routes 52, 1, and 82, the land progressed from city to village to farm and finally out to rolling hills of Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. It was there that W. Plunkett Stewart found what he believed to be the perfect hunt country. Around this time, Stewart also began a breeding program with a pack of American hounds that he'd purchased from a local farmer and began mixing with English hounds. These English hounds, from local master Charles Mather, and hounds imported from England, eventually became one of America's prominent foxhound packs when Mr. Stewart's Cheshire Foxhounds were established in 1912. Stewart's stepdaughter, Nancy Penn Smith Hannum, who had become master of Mr. Stewart's Cheshire Foxhounds, was known for her ability to find and persuade landowners to protect and preserve their properties. Over the succeeding years, this venture ushered in the preservation and conservation of an additional 27,600 acres, more than 43 square miles of virtually continuous open space, making this one of the largest private conservation projects in Pennsylvania. With the help of many of the members of Mr. Stewart's Cheshire Foxhounds, among others, they found a way to protect the land from massive development. The work continues. It has forged a robust bond between the land and the people who live on and steward it. People over time have become part of the landscape, a fusion of the land and its human caretakers that benefits both. So this is a very impressive publication, and I do want to note that this is very professionally done. And for those of you who are thinking about doing your own photo book, this is the kind of stuff you want to take note of, especially with the graphic design. Notice that the layout changes up as you progress through the book. This is a pretty long book, and it never gets boring. It helps divide the sections evenly. It helps present the material of the images. Another thing to note, because I know that people love to put captions on their photographs when they feel like they are important, notice how brief the captions are, number one, and notice how small they are in juxtaposition with the image. This is really well done. The design on here is absolutely beautiful. I love the red cover. I love the map that's used as a paper inlay between the book cover and the actual pages. And of course, if you saw the video that I did on Brilliant, it's one of the best printers I have ever experienced in the United States. Bob Tersak knows what he's doing. I wouldn't expect anything less from this. Just be absolutely stunning in terms of print quality. Now onto the photography, which I also find very interesting on this, is there are several different styles that are used throughout this book. One of the things that I love is the juxtaposition that you have with the black and white images, which suggest maybe early photojournalism, maybe even a street photography nature to them. They have a very gritty and very casual feel to them, and then you juxtapose this with something like the bigger landscapes that are in color, that are very clear, very perfect, very pristine. And then you balance this out with like like the formal portraits when you get into the section of telling the story of the people who are involved with this project. A lot of the dog shots are just incredible, and I love the fact that the style is so varied that it really keeps the vibrancy to this book, and it keeps it flowing in a really interesting way that holds your attention. In other words, if this whole book had been done with one style of photography, I think it wouldn't work the same, and I think this is one thing that makes Jim very talented, and I think he was clearly referenced here. The snow pictures in here are absolutely gorgeous. I love the atmosphere in these. And just like I said, the balance when you come back to these black and white photojournalism style images, like from the 1960s almost. I mean, they're obviously of today. And then there's another element that I really love about this is an element of time in here that seems very old school England, but it's superimposed with this modern book and modern photography. It's a really cool juxtaposition, and it's something that's just kind of unexpected. I'll put a link in the show description where you can buy this book as well as the others that I presented here. These are 3 really interesting examples of this idea of the narrative. Just to summarize a little bit, we have this idea of the narrative. So it is a concept, it's a story, it's something that you want to communicate in a large scale. All 3 of these books did this in very different ways. All were very successful. So we started out with street photography, we moved on to kickboxing, and then we took on a very difficult challenge with this subject of Cheshire Foxhounds. This is a project that Jim spent 30 years on this. I mean, it's really impressive. It's so different. It's something that you can learn about as you're going through it. It's something that I'm not familiar with. I love stuff like that. It's just new and it's different. But the important takeaway are what are the techniques, what are the photographic devices that each one of these photographers is using to create variety and tell that story? Well, in the very first book with street photography, we had the idea of the human figure being the common subject throughout the entire narrative. So we have this anchor that we see visually that has a function in that sense. With kickboxing, there was a very similar aesthetic across the entire book. Everything was black and white. It had a very gritty feel, but the styles of photography that varied that up, going from portraits to action shots to kind of these studio action things, it really gave a lot of variety that gives that book a lot of depth. And of course, with the last book here, I think we see the most variety. We see this in terms of the graphic design layout. We see it in terms of the changing of styles between the black and white early photojournalistic style with the beautiful modern contemporary landscapes with these beautiful portraits. Some of these things have kind of an English look to them, like maybe a nod to old painting styles. It's really mature and very well done, but each one of these has devices that support that overall narrative. And I think that's what you want to go for when you're doing works on a larger scale such as this. It's really easy to get real monotonous real quickly because as photographers, we're not thinking on those terms. We're just thinking of getting the image at the time, and then we're just putting them together in a book that makes sense. And that works when you have a collection of images. But I think if you're really serious about continuity and a continuous thread of story that goes through the whole thing, I think some of these devices are really important to experiment with. Anyway, let me know if you guys have any questions, and I think this is a fun topic, and I'd love to explore it some more. So drop me a comment below. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.